Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a rant for you about the 10 deadly sins in my mind of knife design. The things that most often make me dislike a knife, and where I look at the knife and I realize, oh, that's gonna be a problem for me. And first, let me draw a little distinction. There are a lot of things that'll make me dislike a knife, and a lot of it are actual errors, screw-ups, or things that they did that are just objectively wrong. Things like if you've got a lot of blade play, so the blade shakes back and forth or up and down, like on your Z-Hunter here, which is a piece of crap, that's a problem. But a lot of, even higher-end manufacturers will do that. Sometimes knives are made with poor action, the detent's wrong, things like that. Or maybe there are defects, there's poor finishing on the knife, or the ergonomics are bad. These are just wrong. And there's no matter of opinion, it's just those are wrong things. A knife shouldn't have those. What I want to talk about are things that designers do that are wrong, that are not wrong, but they are wrong for me. That I don't like them, they anger me. And so those are my 10 deadly sins. So let's just go on ahead and jump into my 10 deadly sins of knife design. The first deadly sin I'd like to talk about is Teflon washers. And this is a matter of taste. They're not bad per se, and it's fine to buy knives with Teflon washers. But I, Nick, just don't like them because the action that you get out of them is very smooth, certainly, but it's kind of stick, slip, stick, slip, stick, slip, and I just don't like the feeling of it. You can't ever flick open a Teflon washer knife. It never falls shut. It requires constant effort, and it always just, I don't know, I don't like the feeling of it. So I know that when a knife has Teflon washers, I'm not going to be in love. Unless I can replace them. That's a Nick thing, may not be a you thing. Hope it's not, honestly. Next thing that kind of bugs me a little bit are painted blades and painted handles. So, for instance, on the painted handle side, this is the Kershaw Cryo. It's got some kind of a coating on here, and you can start to see here already a little bit. I haven't carried this all that much, but there's wear from the clip. And if the knife were actually a metal of some kind, like a titanium or, steel or something like that, you could fairly easily restore that. It's not usually the case that you can do that. Even G10, you can sand a little bit, but you can't do that with paint. Similarly, you can see the blade here is painted, and where it's worn away from having the thumb stud there, I'm never getting that back. On a regular steel blade, I could always use a Scotch-Brite pad and polish that out a little bit, or sand it, or something like that. But you can't do that on a painted blade. And it gets real bad with the DLC kind of coating, so this is a Strider. And look, the coating is wearing off like crazy, and some people love this look and love this aesthetic, and I'm not going to crap on their parade. But at the same time, for me, I just don't like buying something that I can never get back to looking pretty much like new, because, I don't know. So I'm not a big fan of painted blades and handles and DLC and all that as well. Let's move on. Okay, next rant is excessively thick blades. So I don't mind the blade that's got some thickness, like your PM2 or your Graham Razel. That can be good for a hard use sort of situation. Not a problem there. The issue is that it gets thicker. People will make these knives that are just folding pry bars, and it's ridiculous. It's absolutely silly, because they're just no good at cutting things. When you get to a point where your blade is this thick, you are never going to be able to cut a potato with it. And so this is a reason why I'm not a big fan of, for instance, some of your... I guess I'll name names. Like Medford makes these really super thick, like the Praetorians. I just don't see it, and so those don't have any appeal to me. It's a whole different aesthetic, it's a whole different world, and it ain't me. Speaking of this, another issue is excessively thick behind the edge blades. What I mean by that is that you can have a blade that is very thick, but like this has a very deep grind. It's a flat grind, so basically right behind the edge, it's not super, super thick. It's still a little thick on the PM2, but nonetheless, where it's a very gradual transition from minimum thinness at the very edge of the blade to the maximum thickness of the stock. On the other side, you can have a knife like this. This is a TAD Dauntless Mark IV, where it's a fairly thick blade, and the transition from the edge to the full thickness is pretty quick. And that just means that this is not going to be as good of a slicer as your PM2, and neither of them will be as good of a slicer as something like your Delica with a much thinner blade. So that's another thing to consider. Even if the stock is relatively thin, if it just balloons out really quickly to a very thick edge, right behind the edge, it's not going to be a great slicer, and I'm not a big fan of that. Okay, let's move on. Okay, next issue is when you build a knife that is meant for hard use, that's really meant to be hardcore, strong, burly, do anything with it, you can't make the thing half out of plastic. So, for instance, this is a Strider, and it has committed this sin. There is nothing on this half of the knife but plastic. Same thing over here on your Tad Dauntless Mark IV. This half is just G10. And given G10's burly, but I'm sorry, if you're gonna make a knife that's supposed to stand up to anything, you should at least give yourself some kind of a liner, like on this guy, your ZT452, or on your PM2, where it's got an internal liner. If you're making it hard use, make it hard use, damn it, and include a little bit of metal for things to screw into. This shouldn't be a problem, and maybe, again, I'm a little oversensitive, but this has really screwed up a lot of knives for me. The Little Iron Spy from Spyderco was really bad in that way. Next rant. There are two ways to carry a knife in your pocket. Some knives, like your Grimsmo Norseman here, are designed to be carried so that when they're clipped in your pocket, the tip of the knife... good detent. The tip of the knife is upwards, so this is called tip-up carry. The other approach is to carry your knife incorrectly, or as other people like to put it, to carry it tip down. And so this is a tip-down carry knife, so when it's hanging in your pocket from the clip, the tip of the knife is pointing downwards. This is a matter of taste, and, you know, I know a lot of people like tip-down carry, but for me, tip-down only carry is kind of a deal breaker. That's the reason I don't carry this Kaiser very often, is because it's tip-down only, and that is the incorrect answer. I know, like I said, matter of taste, but for me, it's a big problem when they do it that way. So let's move on. Another issue that's really disturbingly common is when people put hardware in the slicing path. So, like, this is a good example. This is your Brad Southard Tolk, and I'm okay with it here because there's a whole lot of blade, but the thumb stud is right in the middle of the cutting edge here, which means that if you're trying to use the entirety of the knife to slice, whatever you're slicing into is going to be hitting your thumb stud. So you can't use this to cut a potato or something like that. Or if you're trying to cut into some kind of a material, it'll constantly be hanging up on your thumb stud. I much prefer a knife that puts the thumb stud out of the way of the blade path. Like on your Norseman here, you can see that the thumb stud is clear, by and large, of the majority of the blade, which is a beautiful thing. And this is a pretty common mistake. A lot of people do it, and some people don't even consider it that much of a mistake. The Kershaw Cryo is another one where it had that. The thumb stud went here. It was right in the middle of things. But I'm not a big fan of thumb studs right in the middle of the damn knife. That's just not a great idea to me. Another issue that I have is when designers completely forget that pocket knives are meant to be in the pocket. This is a Cold Steel Tough Light. Great knife. No real problems with it. Well, actually, I got some problems with it, but nothing too terrible. But one of the issues with it is that when you put it in your pocket, it's very wide. It sits like this in your pocket, and then as you're trying to get past it into your pocket, it's really restricting your motion. And if you compare that to a knife like, oh, here's your Southern Tolk, where it's a lot thinner in the pocket and really kind of hides nicely. It stays out of your way, and so sliding by this in the pocket, because your pocket's just taken up this much, it's much, much easier. So I do really prefer a knife that gets out of your damn way when you're putting it into the pocket, as opposed to something that is stupidly wide. The Graham Razel takes high honors in this because of the way that the clip works here. You clip it into your pocket, and then it kind of rotates out of the way, and so if you need to get into your pocket, your hand can actually go in like this on top of the Razel, and that's just nice. But pocket knives that completely forget that they're supposed to be carried in the pocket, that just bugs me. Let's go on. A big thing that bugs me is proprietary screws and hardware. So the vast majority of knives in the world are using something like this, where you have a slotted head, or you've got a Torx bit on there, or you've got, another Torx. I mean, the majority of pivots and screws are made from screwdrivers that most people either have or at least can pick up quickly. But then some people are jerks. Like this is a Kaiser, and they've decided to be total jerks about it and use a pivot screw that nobody can undo. And so, although this guy, you can actually jam an Allen wrench in there and that works, it's just not a great thing. I'm not a big fan of this at all. And so proprietary screws always mess with me. And this is the reason I don't buy Microtech brand knives, because they've all got that funky tri-wing screw that nobody on earth owns. And that just sucks. And actually, that links into the last of my sins, although perhaps the worst of them in my mind, and that's to prevent disassembly. Because a really good knife is user serviceable. You can take it apart very easily. You can clean it. You can lube it. You can sharpen it. Some knives are much easier to sharpen if you take the blade off. For instance, helps to preserve the handle, things like that. But regardless, a good knife is user serviceable. The Grimsmos on their YouTube channel show exactly how to take one apart and lube it up. Similarly, ZT doesn't have any issues with that. Chris Reeve with the, has a really great policy on disassembly. But it bothers me a great deal when people refuse to let you disassemble your knives. And I'm willing to make some exceptions for really complex knives. So, like an out-the-front automatic, okay, yeah, that's tough. You don't want people putting it back together wrong. But honestly, if a knife is too complex to service, I'm not sure I'm going to trust it. That's just me. But anyways, when companies try and prevent disassembly, whether it's by using a proprietary screw or a series of proprietary screws, whether it's by putting a bunch of Loctite in there, red Loctite, so it can never come loose like your PM2 here, or using other weird hardware, or when the pivot screw spins freely so you can't ever take it apart, or even when the warranty policies try and, prevent that, like Spyderco and Medford all have warranties that prevent disassembly. That just bothers me. And so that's kind of the most deadly sin in my mind, is if a knife company doesn't feel good enough about their design that they're willing to show you how to take the damn thing apart and maintain your tools, that's kind of a problem. And it just bugs me everywhere, not just in knives. Heck, I really hate that Apple uses weird screws and prevents you from servicing things. I really think you should be able to fix your tools. But anyways, these are my 10 deadly sins of knife design. Like I said, some people are going to disagree. Some people like tip-down carry. Some people don't mind Teflon washes. Some people love the aesthetic of a well-worn DLC'd blade. But for me, I know that if I'm seeing these things, it's a problem, and it's probably going to make me angry, and it's going to be real hard to be a gem with these things going on. I hope this was interesting to you. If you're a knife designer, please learn from the sins of the past. And if you're not a knife designer, well, tell me what your sins are. Let me know in the comments what bugs you about a knife, and I'll be curious. So if you disagree with any of these, let me know. Anyways, hope this is interesting. Have yourself a wonderful day, and avoid knife sins at all costs.